We're here, and then we're thinking about what we have to do when we get back to our dorms, when we get back home, who we need to call, what paperwork we have to do. And am I relating to anybody in the room? Right? We're not thinking about what Dr. Byers actually said. And before I get started, let me thank the Dean for having me here today. Let me thank our conference co-chairs, our student co-chairs, and our track chairs. It means a lot for you all to allow me this opportunity. Particularly because it is the first human rights conference here at this school. And I talk about being in the moment. There's times when you have to stop what you're doing and think about who came before you. Who sat in this area before you? When you sit on a bench, who sat on that bench? What history did they make for this state? Or where did they go off to and make history? At Howard University, I would sit sometimes, I'd walk down toward our library, Founders Library, and I think, how many civil rights pioneers walked the same path that I am now walking? Think that same thing when you're walking to your classes. You are walking in the steps of legacy. That is what human rights is. But what I'm telling you in regards to walking in the steps of legacy is that you're also setting your own legacy. Every single person in this room and every single person that you touch should be changed because of the things that you do for society. You know, when people think about human rights, they think about women and they think about black or white or other, right? The reality is that human rights deals with education. Human rights is dealing with our labor force. The civil rights movement and the labor force had a strong partnership together. You have to know your history. It's very important that you know your history, not because it's an assignment at school, but because you need to know what you are changing when you go forth. Why are you doing the things that you're doing? What gaps need to be filled when you go out there to do it? When we talk about women's issues, there's more than just our reproductive issues. And we all have so many different things that we think about when we're talking about that. But it's dealing with proper health care for women in general, whether they choose to have children or never have children. Proper health care. Equal pay. You know, I will just be really clear and honest with you. I don't think we should ever have a day for equal pay. It should be 365 days out of the year. And so when I see people posting equal pay day, you know, I struggle because I wanted to post something, but then I'm like, why am I celebrating a day? I deserve the same amount of money every single day that a man gets. And the reality is that is a human rights challenge, fight that we have been dealing with for centuries. Now, when we talk about children, the children we talk all the time is that there's no voice for children. You know, and there are no voices for children. They depend on you to be their voice until they can get to a place where they can speak out for themselves. They need pioneers to be able to stand up and say, you know what? This child never should go hungry. This child deserves proper education. This child deserves to have access to internet, access to literature, access to the top-notch teachers that we have in this state. The teachers deserve to have access to the same things so that they can be innovative and creative and give back to the students, no matter what their zip code is. And the reality is, when you allow people who want to teach you history to only think that human rights are in certain boxes, you're not walking in the steps of your legacy. I will say before I come to anything, I don't really write down anything. I think about what would I want to hear. And I'm hoping that something I'm saying is connecting. Because there's so much work to be done in West Virginia. I mean, Dr. Byers did talk about me running for Congress. And I am, and I'm very proud to do that. I'm actually the first African American to ever run for a federal seat in the state of West Virginia. I'm the first African American to hold the seat that I currently hold, that I win by 88% of the vote. And I say all that not because I'm bragging, but I'm blessed. I'm blessed because I believe that I am walking in my legacy. And when you leave a legacy, that legacy should echo when you're passed. That legacy should be something that people talk about, regardless if you're on this earth or not. Whether you win or whether you lose, the fact that you accomplished the effort to even try is what you should celebrate. And when it comes to human rights, do you think that every time they felt that they were being done wrong in our past, we're celebrating 50 years of civil rights? Do you think that Every time they marched, they got what they wanted. Do you think that it did not hurt them to be hit on the head, attacked by dogs, to be a water hose sprayed on them? Do you think every time that women went somewhere to advocate for their families, regardless of their income, regardless of their education status, that they felt good when they came home, that they didn't need to have a colleague or a friend or a family member encourage them to pick up again and do it again the next day or the next week? Do you think that children that are hungry are not hungry every day if they were hungry the day before and nobody fought for them? The reality is we dealt with a bill called Feed to Achieve. That bill was trying to target the fact that almost 80% of West Virginia are working class families, which means that, in my district, the 37th district, we have a lot of children who receive free and reduced lunches. And what we wanted to do was to remove the stigma of free lunches. We want you to know that when you come to school, we want to fuel your brain, no matter your zip code, no matter if your parents work, no matter if your parents are not working. We wanted to partner with businesses and let them know that you have a responsibility as community partners. You have a responsibility to take care of the children of our state. The reality is, it is everybody's responsibility to care for the human rights of the citizens of this state. Whether you're elected, whether you have a degree, whether you're in college, whether you will never attend college, your responsibility is to walk in the steps of the legacy that you leave. You choose. You make that decision. And so, I was looking at the program, and I was looking at the poster thing, which I think is an absolutely great idea, by the way, students. And you are targeting so many different things. You're dealing with religion. You're dealing with separation of church and state. Sometimes people say that you never talk about religion and you never talk about politics. But if you fail to do some of these things in a way that can respect one another, you leave out a large portion of human rights. We have to figure out a way to be able to communicate with each other, although we have differences, and reach the goal that will benefit this state. Now, I'm talking about the state because we're currently in West Virginia. How many of you all are not from the state of West Virginia? Can you tell me where you're from? I'm also very interactive. So can you tell me where you're from starting right here? Yes.
Virginia.
Virginia.
Detroit, Michigan.
Okay.
Virginia.
Next.
From India.
Okay.
Chicago.
Okay.
North Carolina.
Okay.
Oklahoma.
Oklahoma. Anybody else?
Northern Ireland.
Oh, wow. Well, let me tell you, we're hoping that by the end of the time that you all finish your education, you'll remain in the state of West Virginia. That's our goal. But at the same time, if you return home, we're hoping that we just build and put a seed in you to never stop the legacy. And you also have to understand that you're at a great institution. The reality is, the people that did walk on the soil that you're walking on were phenomenal beings. The buildings that you have named after these individuals, phenomenal beings. So you are already being charged with what will you do? Who will you help? I always say I hope that someone runs for office, particularly women, because you have to be asked 8 times before you actually even consider that you can do it. So let me ask you, please run, 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 please run. I'm asking you, women, please run for office. Now, that's not excluding you men. Let me say that clearly, because we're different. Women, and we're talking about human rights and the purpose of it. That was the reason why I was asked to be here. The importance of human rights and where we are today in the 21st century. When we talk about human rights, there are just some things that we can relate to a little differently and explain in a different way. It doesn't mean that men don't get it. It just means that we have a different concept to it. If you think that your voice does not have a place at power, how do you think you can change the gaps that are there when it comes to human rights? I'm asking that. And I don't expect you to answer, but if you do, I'm okay with that too. And the reason why I'm saying that is you have to understand your value. Now, that was my plug to make sure I targeted my women, because my job is to always empower young ladies. That is my job, and I feel as though that's one of my callings. Now, gentlemen, you're a different breed, and I wish we could figure out how we do this. How many of you have ever had to be asked when it was time to get a promotion? You knew it was time, and you went into your office and asked. Women, we said, well, maybe not. Human rights can't wait for you to figure out your value. The issues of human rights, it doesn't matter. You have to get over some of your uncomfortableness, because if you don't do it, some other people won't step up to do it. You know, if Martin Luther King, and I saw him on the back of this, if Martin Luther King had not stepped up, he was in his 30s. He didn't have someone who came before him to show him how to do the things that he did. He had we talk about the dream all the time, but he had a vision way before he gave that speech of the dream of just talking about the bus boycott, the economy, and human rights. How does the economy affect your human rights? Water. Dr. Byers talked about water. Now, I'm sorry, if you didn't understand how water affected human rights, why should I ever be denied something that everybody needs to live? And if I have less income and there are no water distribution locations, is my family not put at a disadvantage? Human rights deal with every aspect of life, not just the civil rights that we see as a diverse, dealing with gender or race or sexual orientation or religion. It deals with every aspect. And so I'm challenging you to dig deep. Dig deep and see where there's void. You know, we talk about, on your student posters, you have human trafficking. The legislature, we passed a legislation, a piece of bill dealing with human trafficking in the state of West Virginia. A lot of people say, there's human trafficking in West Virginia? There is. There's human trafficking in every state. You have to be vigilant. We talk about child abuse. Your definition of child abuse and my definition of child abuse, we have a commonality, but some people would think that child abuse is someone actually beating someone. They have to have injuries and physically see injury. But if a child doesn't have a parent or a guardian that cares for them and enriches them to be everything that they possibly can be, is that not abuse? How do we fill that gap? If a child doesn't feel as though they're loved by someone, is that not a gap? How do we feel that? What do we do? If a child feels that they're not receiving the education that they deserve, they're not going to see that. They're just going to school. But now let's talk about having a special needs child. A child that has been diagnosed with ADHD. Are we giving them equal education? Are we excluding them? Are we placing them in behavioral health classes instead of acknowledging that they have been diagnosed with something and that they need to be properly cared for and given instruction in a manner in which they receive it? Or do we brush them off? Is that a human rights issue? That's the questions you have to ask yourself. There is no category. And so when you talk about that, immigration issues, you know, we are in a state where we don't feel as though we're diverse. We have small pockets, 3.5, 3.6% African American population. Very small portion of other. And I want to know what other is. Why do we label it as other? You understand what I'm saying to you? And so, what are we doing in the state that you're in? And I say that to the people who are not from here. You know, the reality is when I left West Virginia and I went to D.C., I worked on Capitol Hill. I worked with actually James E. Clyburn, the number 3 Democrat on Capitol Hill in the House. I didn't know who he was at the time or what he would be at the time, but I knew that I wanted to learn. And then I went to Louisiana. When in Louisiana, we worked on different projects around the community. And then for my summer, I went to Alabama to work at a civil rights firm in Selma, Alabama. Has anybody heard of Selma, Alabama? Yeah. I worked at Chestnut and Sanders at a civil rights firm, and we dealt with something called the Black Farmers Lawsuit. It was a federal suit that talked about how white farmers were getting more federal aid than black farmers. I never will benefit from that. I never was doing anything other than helping those farmers that could not read to make sure they filled their paperwork correctly. It is your responsibility to make sure that wherever you are planted, you do your due diligence to leave your legacy. so that you have a story to tell when you get to another part of your life and talk to a younger generation about the places that they should be leaving a legacy. You do not think that your destination or your legacy begins once you have your degree. Your legacy began when you were born. Your responsibility in life, no matter if you had a single home, whether you came from a lot of money or no money, whether you came from a two-parent home, whether you came from somebody who you got the top-notch education, private school or public school, your responsibility began at the very beginning of life. And so, if anything, I hope that I have challenged you to at least think about what really encompasses human rights. Are you doing your part to address the blight of us not as a country addressing everyone as equal? Everyone as equal. Who are we to say that people are not equal? Remember that there were a lot of people in this room that were considered to be less than 1%. Women, you didn't have a right to vote because you were considered property. African Americans, the same. It only happens if you fight for it. And when you become complacent, you may be the next person that's discriminated against. And unless you understand that, it may not be you today. And you stay out of it because you say, that's not my fight. How many of y'all say that? You don't want to raise your hand, but that's not my issue. That's not my issue. I wish them well, but that's not my issue. But then when it is your issue, you want people to come and support your issue. When we talk about, and I started this earlier, and I talked about labor and civil rights, some people like to separate that. Work, equal pay, rights are all connected. We talked about water and rights. We talked about education. We talked about immigration. We talked about sexual orientation. We talked about, and the list goes on. And so my thing to you is, I am challenging you right here today. Before you close your eyes to sleep tonight, I want you to ask yourself, and personally, when you walk to your dorm or you walk to your home, because you got to cross the pathway out here to even get to your vehicle or to get to wherever you're parked or located for your dorm. Whose steps are you walking in? Who will walk in your steps? And what story will you have left them to be proud to say they walked in your steps? You have a challenge today, ladies and gentlemen. You're not just students. You're not just professors. We talked about Dr. Byers continuing his education. You have a responsibility. And so from one colleague to another, one human to another, I'm asking you today, don't go another day thinking it's someone else's fight. It's your fight. Make your legacy echo. Make sure that the steps that you leave are something people are proud to walk in. And regardless if you have disappointments, you've done what you're supposed to do on this earth. Thank you for allowing me to be here. I thank you for the opportunity. If you all need me, you can find me on Facebook or Twitter. I do have a Facebook page. I do have a website. And you also can email me at Misha. I'll give you my card. Because I'm also a member of the legislature. So even though I have dual roles, and it's hard sometimes because I am a legislator first, and even though God has blessed me with other opportunities, I want to make sure that you all always feel that you can reach out to me and that I'm accessible. So leave your legacy, all right, guys? Will you commit to that?
Yes.
All right, thank you.